I just was like so worried about my team. And I just started selling. And the minute I started selling, I saw this potential client just shut down because they didn't need a sales pitch. They needed like camaraderie. They needed understanding. They needed a relationship. They needed empathy.
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples, not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz, real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
My middle school-age daughter asked me a prescient question the other day. She said, "Dad, I have all these team projects now, and it's frustrating having to rely on these other people. Do you have to work with teams?" I thought about it. I told her I did, but I got to admit, I try as much as possible to be on my own so I'm not reliant on others. And it made me realize, I thought I had a tough time asking for help, and I kind of do. But then, oh my gosh, I got the story from today's guest. It's an extreme and powerful story about how hard it can be to ask for help from our team because we feel like we're bulletproof sometimes as marketing leaders. We feel like we can do everything. It's a great story. You're going to love it. You're going to learn a lot from it. She's going to also share other stories from what she's made in her marketing career, illustrating why empathy is not just the human choice, it's the right choice for business, and supporting other underrepresented founders. She calls it lifting as they climb. Joining me today to share that story and many more is Nazia Kamrat, CEO and founder of Faculty. Thanks for joining us, Nazia.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
All right, so just going real quick through your LinkedIn and let people know who you are. First, I noticed a BA in English and Theater from Florida State University. Got to mention, it's my alma mater's rival. I went to UF. Started out in creative and production at Havas Group, and right now you co-founded your own agency, and your client list has included Puma, Holland America Line, AT&T, Lifetime Movie Network, Thrillist, Tums, Bertolli, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, Walgreens, so many more. I can't even mention them all. Tell us briefly about your current role as CEO at Faculty.
Yeah, so Faculty is a storytelling agency. We do a lot in sort of traditional brand storytelling, but also a lot in the sort of experiential and experience design space. And so really what we play most in is telling stories that, have rich technology behind them and really sort of push brands forward. And that's really where our sweet spot is.
Oh, perfect. We're going to ask you to do a lot of storytelling today. So let's get into some of the lessons from the things you made in marketing. So that's kind of unique, I feel like, in the marketing profession. Like dentists or financial managers or bankers, all these things, they don't really get to make things. We get to make things. And jumping into the first thing you made, which is, a human being, I guess. So tell us about that story. How did you learn to know when to ask for help?
Yeah, so when I first started in advertising, it was in the early 2000s, and, being a female in advertising was its own thing. And so I was sort of very independent. I thought I could do everything. I hated asking for help. I loved the brainstorming and coming up with ideas together. But in terms of executing, the reason why I did both creative and production is I didn't want someone else to bring my ideas to life. I had to control it all. That's sort of how I grew up in the advertising world. And so I started my own agency about 10 years ago and, thought that, you had to be really strong as a leader. You had to not show any cracks. You had to be always put together and be in your A game. And so, and that served me pretty well for the first, 5 years of my business. And then I got pregnant. And then about 6 months into my pregnancy, I got some complications and ended up, having to be on bed rest in the hospital for the duration of my pregnancy. And I made the decision to not tell any of my clients because I thought if my clients knew, then they would lose, faith in the agency and they would be like, oh, well, she's going to have a baby and she won't be able to service our brand and all that silliness. And so I didn't tell anyone. I told my business partner and a couple of my team members. I told some of my clients that I were pregnant, but very few knew that I was having any challenges. So again, all good and fine until I was actually we were pitching for a new client, and I was in the hospital, and I was on a Zoom call. This was obviously before Zoom was like a thing. So I was on like a video chat, but it was before the last few years where this was like super comfortable to do. And so I would kind of like, I sort of set my stage. Everything looked fantastic. I had my makeup on, the whole nine. And I'm talking about, the proposal and all the things that we could do. And all of a sudden, all these sirens go off and like lights starting to flash. And the woman in the room next to me went into emergency labor. And I quickly like shut my camera off, and I was like, I'm in Brooklyn. The sounds of Brooklyn are weird. Like, it's not a big deal. The clients totally bought it, I think. But it was at that moment where I was like, oh my goodness, like this hiding myself for the people that I'm working with or want to be working with, the amount of like complication this presents in the world is beyond like what is humanly possible to sort of go with. And so it was sort of at that moment where I was like, okay, this is no longer working. And then I, the end result is I had a baby, right? And so like it's sort of okay to hide it's like kind of easy-ish to hide a pregnancy, like
you just carry a box in front of you, and you're
or like you just like oh, we're just gonna take calls. I'm not gonna go to meetings or whatever. Okay. And so like I was able to like kind of make that work, but like then you have like a human, like a crying human that needs food and needs your attention, and it's really hard to hide that. And so I was a new mom, and I was trying to grow the business, and I was going into the office, and I was like pumping, and I was traveling. Like I think I went on my first business trip when Ezra was like maybe a month old, and like pumping in the Uber, like that level of stupid. And I just realized that like in retrospect, I should have stopped and said, you know what, like I have an amazing team. I have amazing clients who care, and like people would understand. Like having a human life is a big deal, and it's a big thing to make, as you said. And if I would have been able to share more of myself in those moments and ask for help, I think I would have had a little bit of an easier time. But since that point, it sort of made me grow my own network. I have these incredible network of other women executives who all have kind of been through similar stuff. And so now we're able to support each other better. So in the end, it worked out fine, but it definitely took me a little bit to learn how to not do it all myself, ask for help when I need to, and share who I am, because I think that actually creates better relationships with your colleagues and with your clients.
I mean, something we've repeatedly seen on the podcast is leaders being vulnerable, or when people on the podcast whose leaders were vulnerable, how they made such a closer connection to them. But I would say in my own career, that has been sometimes the most stressful thing, trying to balance work and life. But it's weird because when I think, on the other hand, when I know when someone else has been going through something and they ask me for help, like I am happy and excited and lean forward to help this person go through that thing, right? But it's such a weird thing on this end, being able to say like, no, everything's fine. I'm going to get through it all. But so your story was before COVID, right?
It was. So this was. So my son just turned 4 in November. So this was about 4 or 5 years ago when this was all going down. So pre-COVID, people were still expecting you to travel like all the time, and the fact that I wasn't at that pitch was like a big deal. I had to make lots of excuses to not be there. So it's definitely a different time now, and I also think that the level of empathy and vulnerability that leadership is is doing now, I think is different now than it was. I think that we see into each other's homes now. We're both there now. We see, the kids come in, the dogs are barking. We see a little bit more into people's lives. And I think that has actually made us be better in business. So although COVID is terrible and there's so many horrible things, I do think that it sort of allowed us to be more empathetic, more vulnerable, share more of who we are and in turn sort of be better towards each other in business, which I think ultimately is a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. Don't put me down as against COVID. I'm not for COVID, but I think we've probably earned about 10 years of growth for every year we've gone through in COVID, like the 2 or 3 years we've gone through it now. And that is definitely one, I think, huge upside of this, as people were allowed to kind of be more human and have lives more and kind of just figure all that out together. Because while obviously COVID did not impact everyone in the same way, it impacted everyone. I mean, from Tom Hanks to me, and I mean, probably not as much. And so I think that's kind of been a beautiful just leadership and marketing lesson for all of us outside of that, is to balance the humanity to it. And I also think, and maybe you've felt this way too, that humanity makes us better marketers. I know since I've had my kids are less than machines. It's amazing. And they've taught me so much. And it's definitely made me a better communicator, better marketer, more empathetic, understanding people more and being more curious.
100%. I think having my son has definitely made me better in business, a better leader, 100%. Like just the amount of understanding I have towards like just general human nature is like grown crazy amounts. And also like you see, seeing your 4-year-old discover things, that moment of discovery that they have, and using that to sort of help, particularly with what we do is we create experiences. And like, if we can get everyone who goes through one of our experiences, whether that be digital or physical, have that moment of joy that like my kid has when he like went on like a roller coaster for the first time, right? Or he's like, mind was blown. Or like, we took him this weekend to go see his first play because, it's been COVID and you don't do that, or we haven't been able to do that. And so just to see him watch something live on stage and that moment of wonder. And I think taking those lessons and saying, how do we like bottle that and like allow consumers and audiences to sort of have those experiences in whatever way is sort of brand appropriate, I think is a great learning for all marketers, 100%.
Yeah, I would say another thing that children do very well is they are amazed by the banal. Like just taking my young daughter to Publix, which is a grocery store here in Florida, and seeing the things that would catch her eye and blow her away really gets you to look at things in a new way. And the questions I ask, like they would ask me a lot, why are things this way? And I think as marketers, and whether on the agency side or the brand side, that's what we need to be. We need to be the questioners in the organization saying, why are things this way? Why do we fulfill through a third-party vendor versus directly and have a better brand experience? Like, why are they? Did they have to be this way? So,
100%.
Right. So great lesson from there. Nasya said her lesson was know when to ask for help. It's a lesson we can all take away. Now, let's move on to your next lesson, your next story. Empathy is not just the human choice, it's the right choice for business. And so now I think we fast forward to the COVID era in your career and tell us about this experience.
So, COVID, as you said, hit everyone. It hit some people more than others, for sure, in a variety of ways. And so being in running a small business and running one where so much of what we do is experiences, and a lot of those being physical experiences. Like one of our longest standing clients is a cruise line, which was a challenging time during COVID. Or we do lots of events and big activations and brand activations and retail experiences. And so, COVID hit, and we just saw every contracts cancel or being put on hold. And day after day was just like pure panic, a constant just being like, okay, scenario 1, scenario 30, scenario 122, of just sort of trying to say what would happen if this, then what. And so we had this opportunity with a potentially new client, and we were going to, do a capabilities presentation, get to know them a little bit. It's someone who I'd been talking to for a little while now, so I had known him personally, but he was going to get his team and my team on the phone, and we're going to have a big kind of get to know each other moment. And right before the meeting, about, a few hours before that meeting, he emailed me. He's like, hey, can we reschedule? We just had to lay off, half of our team. Could we reschedule? And I was like, oh, of course. Yes, no problem. Hope everything's okay. Give me some times. And so we were scheduled for like a week or two later. And I realized, so we had the meeting and it was going well. We were asking how things were going. They were telling us how things were. And my team, as they were hearing about this company that just laid off half of their workforce, I could see their faces and the anxiety behind their eyes. And I was like, and I just went into car sales mode, which is totally not who I am. I am not a car salesman, but I just was so worried about my team. And I was and I just started selling. And the minute I started selling, I saw this potential client just shut down because they didn't need a sales pitch. They needed camaraderie. They needed understanding. They needed a relationship. They needed empathy. And, I kind of finished up my thing and the call ended and I got out the phone and you're on calls and you're oh, that felt fantastic. And then you get off some and you're oh my God, that was horrible. And so I knew it was the latter for this one. I knew, I was that did not go the way that we intended that to go. And I realized in that moment that I was so worried about sort of my own story and my own concerns and my own team and my own worries that I didn't consider that every single human on that call was worried about homeschooling their kid or taking care of their aging parents or all the other things or washing off their groceries like we did in the early days of COVID. And it reminded me that sympathy is one thing. So being sympathetic towards someone else's experience, but really being empathetic and really knowing that every single person, particularly during COVID, we've all been through something pretty intense and pretty traumatic and pretty crazy. And if we can take that shared experience and learn from it and sort of really truly lead with empathy and communicate with empathy, it allows for richer relationships, I think, and allows for long relationships. So if I would have handled that call differently, I think not only would we have potentially been able to get a new client, I wouldn't have this amazing story to tell of this amazing lesson that I learned, but I do think,
mistakes, right?
right, totally. So you have great stories to tell. Yeah, exactly. But I do think I could have actually created long-standing relationships with every human on that call. Some who are still at that place, some are at other place, and I, in my anxiety, we'll say, I sort of made that not be what the reality was. So I think it was a good lesson in empathy. I think all of COVID has been a good lesson of empathy. But I think that was the first one for me where I was oh, right. This is a shared experience that we all need to be able to better support each other in and understand each other. And I think that is one of the positive things of COVID is I do think that's and again, COVID is there's not very many positive things, but I do think that it's made us more human and it's made us more vulnerable and made us more accepting of where each and every one of us are every day.
Yeah, and what you're talking about is that communication with clients, with your own team. But, something we commonly talk about here on the How I Made It in Marketing podcast is we've got to do that with our customers. It's very hard. And you brought up, I think, a really good word that we hadn't talked about yet when it comes to this is anxiety. And I think a lot of times when you see poor marketing that doesn't really consider the customer, it is anxiety of, am I going to hit my numbers this quarter or this week? Am I going to get enough leads on this? Let me just push and ask for too much and cold calls and spam and whatever these things are. And, the number one thing we have to think about is, we call it customer theory. We actually have a tool. It's called How to Develop Your Customer Theory, right? We sit down and ask all these questions about a customer because we have such a different lived experience in the customer sometimes, right? It's very different from ourselves. So I think about, when I used to make a video or, an ad and you go into the studio with an editor and have a nice catered lunch and you see it on this big, beautiful monitor and these great speakers and it's a fantastic experience. Then it gets out in the world and it's, a busy mom looking at on her phone while her kid just dropped a hot dog on the ground and is crying and, and her husband just got laid off or whatever, and it's such a different experience we face. And so that's such an important thing to remember. Not only that empathy for others that we're interacting with on a one-on-one basis, like clients and teams, but those customers we may never see. Don't let our anxiety get in the way. Really learn about them and try to have that empathy for them and understand them.
Yeah, that's such a good point too, because I think so much of marketing has that sort of anxiety in the background. Like you said, like it is like, we're like, oh, well, we have to reach our numbers. Or, I always laugh at, and like we all do this, but like when we're doing persona work, we're like, oh, we're going to put this like idea of a human, and this is who we're trying to target. And the reality
give a name
is,
to that person, so
we'll give a
they'll seem
name.
more real.
We'll call her.
So there you go.
We'll call her Molly.
Yeah.
And but the real Molly is the woman whose kid just dropped their hot dog and whose husband just got laid off. And so all that context that surrounds who that customer is and who that audience is, and not even like in general, like in the moment that they're receiving your communication, and it's really hard to be planful of that. But I do think that if you create work and create marketing that is incredibly human, people will be able to find truth in it wherever they are, right? And so I think a lot of times the marketing that often fails is the one that is like, oh yes, it was this beautifully shot thing and it was all polished. And I think that worked at one time. I think that was what advertising was at one time. I don't think that is what's resonating with audience today. I think audiences want the realness, and they expect that level of conversation with the brands that they care about.
Well, I will challenge you on the fact that that's new, because you used a great word there, truth. And the best definition I've ever heard of advertising is probably 100 years old. It's the truth well told, right? Yeah. Good ads have always been that. They've just always been tapping into some, truth that's deep, that goes, to our humanity, I think.
Yeah. No, and 100%. I think we just don't need the level of polish that we once needed, right? Like, I don't think that the expectation is like we're going to, like, have that $1 million spot, that 15-second spot that took, X amount of days and X amount of humans and, a crew of 75 in some remote place of the world, right? Like, I think that has changed because I think the world is moving faster than that for sure. And I do think that there's some truth that gets lost in that. So I think smart, honest, relevant, creative is still what resonates. And I think that's what we should all be striving for. And like, I do think that, I think COVID has sort of helped, us learn that too, is that, we want to create loyalists, not just customers, right? We want to get people who believe in the brand and believe in the brand ethos. And I think that comes when you have really incredible advertising, not just great marketing plans.
Not just a lot of polish on something that doesn't have that deep truth to it.
Yeah.
So here's the last lesson you want to share with us from the things you made: supporting other underrepresented founders, lifting as we climb. So how did you learn this lesson, Nazia?
So, I think, it's over the years, I've sort of learned this lesson time and again. I think, even as early as when I first started my business, I identify as a woman. My founding partner is Taiwanese. And I remember when we first started the agency, we had to choose one or the other to be either like certified women-owned or certified minority-owned. And we couldn't be both. And that was like a moment where I was like, that's weird. Why can't we be both? Like, why wouldn't you be able to be both? We equally own the company, and we both, are part of underrepresented communities. And that's just not the way the system worked. And that was sort of like a moment where, I was sort of shocked by it, but and disappointed by it, but you sort of go along with the ride. And then I think, a few years later, and this has happened a few times, but there's one call I had with a procurement, a Fortune 50 company, and they said, we love your work, we love what you do, but we're only hiring this type of agency because, it was during some big hashtag moment and they only wanted to hire for the hashtag because of optics. And it took me a second to sort of, 100%, yes, we should be supporting all underrepresented founders, but by this idea that we have to be separated into these boxes and we have to be, Black owned or women owned or LGBTQ plus or any of those boxes, they're actually sort of separating us further. And so I think by combining our voices and sort of be saying, hey, no, we're kind of all in this together. We have different experiences, but we have the shared experiences of being less heard in this space. And so for me, it was that moment after that call where I was like, yes, faculty is a woman-owned company and we're certified and all of that, but by finding different voices and supporting all the underrepresented founders who are doing really interesting work and really independent, amazing work, we're actually sort of able to no longer be the minority, which I think is a really exciting thing. So what I try to do in my efforts is take all the various underrepresented agencies that I know and sort of have us always work together to sort of be a solution towards the sort of traditional holding company model of being able to do really great work and having really diverse voices work together on them.
Sounds like a co-op kind of.
It is. So we actually started it is a co-op, but it is a network. So we actually took the model of a holding company and we have different specialist agencies who kind of handle all the various specialties, but they're all, everyone within it is a woman, minority, LGBTQ+, BIPOC led independent shop. And so, but really it's a little bit different because we actually are taking the holding company model and just sort of flipping it on its head. And we just happen to all be independent and we're not all sort of paying to, the French guy at top.
With the shareholders.
With the shareholders, yeah.
All right, great. So those are some of the things that Nadia shared from what she's made. But there's something else we do as marketers too. We collaborate with people. We work with others, and hopefully we're really taking something from that along the way, a lot of lessons that we learn. So your first lesson from someone you collaborated with is Bill Prince. He's the SVP of Entertainment at Holland America Line. And you said you learned a great example of how to be authentic. How did you learn that from Bill?
Yeah, so we've been working with Holland America Line for about 8 years now. And Bill, very early on, we're in the agency world, so we'd put together the fancy presentation, we'd print out beautiful boards, we do the show. And he'd just be like, I don't want any of that. Just tell me what's going on. All of the song and dance agency stuff that we're so prepared to do all the time. Every time I start to kind of go there, he just all right, just tell me what you want to do. Tell me how much this can cost. Tell me how we're going to get there. Why is it a great idea? And there's no BS. There's no smoke and mirrors. It's just how do we create great work and be really authentic and, it's an actual real collaboration, which I think is really interesting from a client and vendor perspective, where he doesn't want to be treated like a client. He wants to be treated like a collaborator. So let's just all roll up our sleeves and get our hands dirty. So there's this level of authenticity that we have that I think is no other client relationship that I've ever had, which has been amazing. But it's also sometimes you forget and you put on a song and dance and then he rolls his eyes and he's like, stop. So I kind of always have to remind myself that I don't have to do that with him, which I think is a really freeing experience.
Well, and that sounds like you have a real relationship too. I mean, that's what we should want from our agency vendor, that real relationship where they could have those honest conversations with you.
Yeah, and it becomes a friendship, right? There's a trust there and a friendship there, and we want to do great work for him because we enjoy working with him. And so I think it's a little bit of a different mode than a lot of other relationships that sort of brands have with their agency vendors.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's talk about a relationship you have inside your agency. Aaron Wolf, the Chief Creative Officer at Faculty. You said you learned from Aaron the power that your own stories have to connect more effectively with others, which is great. I mean, that's the whole point of this podcast, so that's great. Yeah. How did you learn that story?
Yeah, so Aaron is amazing. So Aaron, I think was one of our very first freelancers 10 years ago, and slowly we brought him into the fold, and then he became full-time, and now he's our third partner. So we slowly kind of brought him into the fold. And he is an incredible storyteller. He's very involved in the moth community, and he is, a very, renowned storyteller. And there was one time a few years back, I think my son was probably about like 5 or 6 months old, and we were living in Brooklyn. And, living in Brooklyn with a small human is like, it's hard, right? Like I realized very, very, very quickly that I was not the mom to take the stroller on the subway and not be really annoyed by my life. Like that was not for me. And so, I think my husband and I were like folding laundry or something, and we were listening to one of Aaron's stories. He was doing a podcast, or he was telling one of his stage stories, and we were listening to it. And it was the story of how he had to make the decision to leave New York. He had a kid, and his wife had a really amazing opportunity in just outside of Boston, and he was like me, like kind of, he was a New Yorker. He like very strong ties to New Yorker. Like my family was like born and raised in Brooklyn. Like I had very strong ties to New York. And so he tells this really beautiful, honest, like human story about how he had to decide this like really hard decision of leaving his identity, basically, and then moving because it was the right choice for his family. And so my husband and I are listening to this, we're folding laundry, and we like kind of look at each other and we're like, damn it. And so a few months later, we moved to Portland, Oregon, because it was the right choice for our family. But it was in that moment, not just that like, hey, we're going to like, change our entire life and move across the country. But it was the moment where I realized how powerful stories can be, not just in a personal relationship in terms of friends, but also in a business relationship of like hearing a colleague of mine be that honest and that transparent and that authentic and that human, telling so much of who he was, sort of made me realize how storytelling can actually create incredible business relationships that are beyond the sort of personal ones that we so know. So he's taught me that, and he teaches me that time and again. And that has actually, since he's been sort of on, as a partner, and even before that, like so much of what we do has taken that, the passion for storytelling and really amplified it, and how we've been able to do that for our clients. But that was the first moment where I was like, storytelling really does matter. Look at that. And it was sort of a nice life lesson for me.
Well, it's funny, we have the word conversion in marketing and conversion optimization.
He converted me 100%, like without a doubt. I am now living in Portland, Oregon, which is not something I ever thought I would be doing, because he was so convincing in his storytelling abilities to convert me that I did not need to identify or I could still identify as a New Yorker without even being in New York, I think was the lesson. Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, when you were saying that, I was thinking that sounds like a conversion. So whether it's, converting someone from not subscribing to our email to subscribing to our email, or, not purchasing our product to purchasing our product, or living in New York to not living in New York. I mean, the stories make such a big difference.
Yeah.
When I was trying to think through what, there's a lot of podcasts out there. Obviously, there's so many podcasts about marketing. I think that the name for this podcast is like the 12th name I came up with, because they're all taken before. And thinking, what is kind of missing in that landscape? It came to what you just mentioned, is the stories, because I don't hear, I hear so many buzzwords in our industry. I hear about, use AI and, use marketing automation or be authentic. But like the opening story you had that we talked about, you could have just said, hey, you need to reach out to your team when you need help, and that's being a good marketing leader. But when you're walking through that story of saying, I was in a maternity ward on a client pitch, I mean, that illustrates it so much. And so I think for everyone on the call, look at your brands and think, they've all got stories. What are those stories, and how can you more honestly and authentically tell them?
Yeah,
So.
yeah, and reaching the right audiences. Like when you're trying to reach people, like I am sure I told my maternity war story, and there's like some mom or soon-to-be mom, or someone who's thinking about having a kid, or someone who had an experience that was like, or like remembers, being pregnant, being like, that would have sucked, that connectivity that you get by having that honest storytelling, I think is what really transforms that. Like, conversion is important, but like if you don't convert to loyalty, like it doesn't matter, right? Like, sure, I can sign up for the email, but if I don't read it, it doesn't matter, right? So how do you actually use story to kind of continuously connect with your customers and your audience and create a relationship that's not one-sided?
Yeah, and I think to your point, it's respecting and understanding that there is a customer journey and where are your customers in that journey and what do they have to hear at that time, right? 100%. So you were clearly at that point in your journey where you were ready to hear that story. It was perfect for you. And so that's, as marketers, that's the best we can be, is getting that story to that person when they need to hear it.
Exactly. So it was 100%. Like I heard the story, I think I probably actually heard the story like a couple years before that, and like it didn't resonate, right? Like, or I like heard him tell me the story, but in that moment, because we just got the small human to sleep after like whatever, and we were tired, and we were in that new parent insanity. That was the only story we could hear at the moment to justify what our decision was. And so I think using that and then again, like, we brought Aaron on as a partner because that is his sweet spot. And so he's been able to translate that for our clients as well. And that's been really a powerful thing to sort of witness.
Well, I think that's a great example, too, as you look at a customer theory or persona, whatever you want to call it. You were probably the same, Nasia between 25 and 45 who, shops for organic food and likes hiking or whatever, right? At both those times, but you were a totally different person. Even though you felt into that same demographic.
Yeah, much more sleep deprived, 100%. I was definitely more sleep deprived in that moment, so maybe more receptive to alternative thinking of what my life would be. So...
It's like find sleep-deprived customers. That's it. All right. Yeah. The final person you learned a lesson from, you want to talk about Lori Spielberger-Klein. She's now a consultant at LSK Creative, but I think this happened when she was the executive creative director at Havas Health. Havas, I never say it right. Yeah. And you learned how to embrace empathy and humor in leadership. How did you learn that from Lori?
Yeah, so Lori was amazing. So I didn't intend to be in advertising. I actually went to New York to do theater, and then I needed health insurance. So I started working at Havas, as you do. And she was my boss, and she was hilarious and kind and funny and so smart. But I remember very vividly, she... had this sort of comic on her wall in her office, and it was a New Yorker comic, and it was a bunch of like doctors sort of like around a table like doing surgery, and like the line underneath was, "Oh, well, at least it's not advertising." And so that was sort of how she approached everything. We're like, we are doing great work, we're doing creative work, we're doing it in the best way possibly can. But like, we should have some humor in there, right? Like, this isn't brain surgery. We are making ads. And I think that sort of learning the business with that mindset, with that level of humor and empathy and kindness, and like, let's just not take it so seriously, even though we love what we do, I think sort of really put me on the track that I ended up being on, because she was such a great mentor in my sort of really early formative years in my 20s.
And that's a great leadership lesson. It's by nature a deadline-driven industry. It's a pressure-filled industry because you could lose a client, you cannot get the sales you want. But you're not going to get the best work out of people when they feel under the gun. I mean, we're an idea industry, we're a creative industry, and you have to have that levity to it and that feeling of like, I can spread my wings, I can risk, I can fail, I can, and it's not going to be so serious. I have worked with people who have been dead serious over a period or a comma in a headline, and it was like, life itself would end if we did not end this headline in a period. And sometimes you just have to remind yourself in those moments that, like you said, hey, it's not a life or death decision. It's just advertising, folks. It's just marketing.
Yeah. I agree. And and again, I love what I do. And, I am very passionate about the type of work that we do. But I do recognize that, nothing's going to die on the table, right? If we don't get our work done appropriately. So I think that was a great lesson. And she was a really patient, kind, humorous, mentor, particularly during a time in advertising where, it was like in the early 2000s, there wasn't much mentorship happening or humor happening or kindness happening in other places. So having that as sort of my first leader to learn from was really, really transformative.
Well, may we all be leaders like Lori. That's a great lesson. Well, let's end here with the same question we ask everyone on the show. We've talked about a wide range of topics, from creating a human life to moving out of the city to so many other things. But it begs the question, what are the key qualities of an effective marketer? What do we need to be able to do all these things?
So I would say there are sort of three things, and I think sort of our conversation really leads to these three things. One is sort of empathy. I think you need to understand other humans to be able to be good at marketing. You need to understand how to talk to people, how to tell those stories, how to reach those people, and where to reach them and when. And I think that comes with understanding human nature and being empathetic. I think you have to sort of always be learning. I think part of what makes great marketing amazing is that it's evolving, right? And you learn from your mistakes, you learn from the data, you learn from the metrics, but you also learn from just the conversations around what you're putting out into the world. And so always learning, always sort of being curious about how to push things forward and sort of do something differently, I think is a really imperative part of being in this marketing game. And then I think the last thing is like, just have fun. Like, this is life could be hard, right? Like, if the last 2 years have taught us anything, like, it's hard. And so find those moments of joy, find those moments of fun. And they may be hard to find sometimes. Like, it is, it could be, it's been a weighty couple of years for sure. And so I think finding some time to just laugh and realize that we actually get to do really fun stuff and really cool stuff. And like, we could be doing stuff that isn't so fun and it isn't so cool. So sort of appreciating the fact that we get to be creative and we get to, do things that are a little bit out of the norm. I think appreciating that and enjoying the ride, I think is a big one for all marketers to sort of understand.
Enjoy the ride. I like it, Asya. Well, Thanks for joining us, and I've certainly enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a fun conversation. I think I've learned a lot even from this conversation. It's amazing how you can kind of keep evolving what we know.
Absolutely, and hopefully everyone listening learned as well. So thanks to you all for listening.
Yeah, thanks again.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketing, SHERPA.com.